and welcome to the second online Book Machine Unplugged. And tonight we're talking tech. My name's Suzanne. I will be your host for the brief introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to the inimitable Emma Barnes, who's hosting tonight with a spectacular range of speakers. I get the lucky job of saying thanks to some people who help make Unplugged happen. First of all, Team Unplugged, a group of publishing professionals who spread the word about the event to their networks and in their companies. And we couldn't do it without them. We really appreciate your help. Thank you guys. And obviously keep up the great work, because we've got yet another sold out event tonight. Now, the other really important partners who help make all of this a reality and who have stuck with us through thick and thin this year are our sponsoring partners. First of all, I just want to tell you a little bit about Typefy. Now, Typefy is a global leader in automated publishing software. They help organisations worldwide to publish content in more formats, but up to 80% faster. And they do it without compromising on design or content integrity. Getty Images are the world's biggest creator and distributor of digital content. They provide high quality imagery across every aspect of creative, editorial and archive. Now, if you work with them, fantastic, they'd love to hear from you. But if you don't work with them, even better. If you contact Michael Alpin, he would be really happy to talk to you, and he can advise on all aspects of their cost-effective licensing solutions and how you can access the world's biggest commercial archive. Now, last but by no means least is Ingram Content Group. Now, the world is reading, especially at the moment. And Ingram Content Group connects readers with content in all forms. They have a range of services, including print on demand, digital and physical book distribution, and also digital e-learning. And they have comprehensive services for publishers, for retailers, for libraries, and for educators, which is obviously vital at the moment. So Ingram makes content distribution seamless and accessible. Now, if you want to get in contact with their marketing manager, Andy Bromley, he'd be happy to talk through their services with you. Now, handing over to Emma. Emma is our host. She's also a member of the Book Machine editorial board. She's the multi-award winning founder and CEO of Consonants, Snow Books and Make Our Book. But most presciently for tonight, she is the founder of Side Project Summer, which is a network of book publishers who code or who want to code. And it's a really friendly kind of, people want to help each other. So really on point for the discussion this evening. So without further ado, over to you, Emma.
And she unmutes successfully. Technology, I can do it. The fact you've carved out time this evening to hear the stories of publishers who code is such a testament to your resilience. I have to say, my head has been like a wasp's nest for the last few months. Lockdown is not necessarily going to produce the conditions conducive to learning complex new skills. So I think it's highly impressive that you've turned up. And if you're listening to the recording of this later, because you couldn't make the live thing because you were having a low or you were covered in kids, or you just heard the latest Tory news briefing and thought, right, that's enough computers for one day and slammed the lid down, then I'm very impressed at you for coming back to listen to us later. So thank you for coming, and thank you to Book Machine and Suzanne for always making these things so enjoyable and providing some sort of community for us to all hunker around. This evening you're going to hear a range of stories from a range of people who I am delighted have agreed to share their journeys. And it's that range that's important, actually, because, you know, we're all different. Each of us have a different set of experiences. You know, our motivations are different aspirations and different conditions, working conditions at the moment. And all of these affect how we're going to approach the need or the desire to code. So what I want you to do this evening is to think about your own story so far and what you want it to read like next, and take inspiration from these wonderful people who have agreed to talk to you this evening, who've trodden the path before you. And whatever happens, be kind to yourself, because the main thing is to just get through the current emergency in one piece. It is completely valid in these strange times, TM, to consider getting dressed to be a huge victory. Please don't feel you have to learn to code on top of everything else. What we're going to hear about tonight are how other people have become coders. And as you'll hear, it's always hugely personal, hugely dependent on the magical confluence of circumstance and motivation and interest and capacity and accident. So maybe your time has come to learn to code, like our panelists this evening, but maybe it'll happen in 10 years. It doesn't matter. Computers aren't going anywhere. And coding isn't even a magic bullet that's going to fix the world. What the world needs right now is kindness and hope. So let's all get those bits right first, and the computers will still be waiting for you. Kindness and hope. My own story in code started almost 10 years ago to the day, weirdly, when I was, and this is very much long story short, got divorced, then hooked up both personally and professionally with someone who turned out to be an actual con man who invented 3 children to act as the perfect cover for his relationships with multiple women. And when I found out, I shut our business down and I found myself on benefits with a baby and no income, which was, just great. So point is, people have their own personal crises all the time. And here we all are now in a kind of weird meta crisis. When everything's gone to shit, I can absolutely promise you, with the benefit of hindsight, that you want to take the actions now that you'll look back on in 10 years' time and say, yes, that was bad, 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 bad. But I rose phoenix-like from the ashes and it didn't destroy me. And the reason that I made it out of my personal worst year of my life crisis was down to one simple act of kindness. Amongst lots of other support, my best friend gave me a copy of the Rails tutorial by Michael Hartle. I don't quite know what was going through his head, like learn to code when I've got no money and a baby and entirely lost my faith in human nature. But it was exactly what I needed. Coding was a panacea. It gave me solace. It was something logical and enjoyable and quiet and a bit difficult, but something that allowed me to build up my self-worth, earn money, build something for the future. It was something I didn't have to worry about. It was something pure and engaging. And critically, it let me forget about the world for a bit. So I'm not even going to mention all of the reasons why, the career reasons why coding is good. Just do it purely as part of your mental survival toolkit. And oh, by the way, this was completely a huge difference from the previous times I tried to learn to code. For a start, I needed a distraction, but I tried with a formal open university course previously, and it was just all weird techno nonsense to me. So if one approach doesn't work for you, do try something else, and you'll hear lots of ideas for different approaches from different people this evening. So this is me paying forward the kindness of my friend. Here's me in your moment of crisis, handing you your own virtual copy of the Rails tutorial, amongst other resources that might work for you. And Suzanne mentioned there's more links on the sideprojectsummer.com website, which you can join in on over the summer. I believe in you and all of us, and I know that we can come out of this crisis stronger and with our heads held high. It doesn't even matter if you don't learn to code. These times are impossible. But you're here, you're thinking about it, and you care about your technical literacy. You've done the hard bit by getting out of bed, I think, to be honest. So maybe you currently are in bed, I don't know, whatever. Well done. So you're going to settle back and please enjoy the range of stories that you'll hear from my panelists this evening. And we are going to start now with Jamie.
Hi. So yeah, I'm Jamie from University of London Press, where I'm publications assistant. I just wanted to start with a quick thanks to Emma and everyone at Book Machine for setting up this event and for the opportunity to be part of it. It's a shame not to see any faces for sure, but it's great that so many people are interested in the topic and able to tune in. Like I've seen people from all over the place in the chat, which is really nice. So I hope you come away feeling inspired to get, designing and building some cool stuff. And yeah, was actually an event quite similar to this that got me started on my journey a couple of years ago. So you'll hear a bit more about that. So yeah, hopefully this is kind of, paying it forward in some ways. So yeah, I guess the main thing about my journey into coding is that it's been pretty indirect. I am very much from a non-technical background and was actually something of a technophobe for like most of my teens and early 20s. I had a Nokia brick and probably until the age of like 22, which about sums up, I think, my relationship with so-called tech, like up to that point. It's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what it was that caused the shift, but I guess a few things contributed to it. And one of which was that so a few years back, I was teaching English abroad. I was living in Krakow, in Poland, which it turns out is a bit of a tech hub in Europe. And I ended up getting a contract to teach a couple of students in a programming company. So I would like cycle there in, you know, whatever temperature, like horrible minus temperatures, and turn up at this really swanky programming office, where, you know, they'd be shuffling around in their office slippers, like drinking coffee and, you know, surrounded by bean bags and like weird diagrams on whiteboards. And it was all a bit kind of confusing to me. But I got over the initial kind of strangeness of the environment and got on really well with a couple of the students. And the lessons were fairly informal, so I ended up kind of learning a bit about what they were up to, and also really importantly learning that being a programmer is not synonymous with, you know, moving to Silicon Valley and like selling your soul to Google, and that it takes all types, which is a really important thing in my journey. So, I mean, I didn't do all that much with it to start with, just kind of incorporated a few like digital tools in my English lessons and stuff. But it was a couple of years later, so I moved back to the UK and found myself in textbook publishing. And I went to an event I mentioned at the beginning, not dissimilar to this one. And yeah, so it was Emma and a few other speakers, and I was just really inspired by their stories. And it kind of, yeah, just gave me the impetus to like really get cracking with it. And something happened like a few weeks after in work, which kind of really struck home how useful it can be, which was essentially that I was tasked with just the most mind-numbing thing you could think of, which was renaming like thousands of files, and it, you know, something that would just take an inordinate amount of time and just be so mind-numbing. And I kind of thought about some of the stuff I'd heard in the talk, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do a bit of research and see if I can, you know, find maybe a way to alleviate some of this like soul-destroying work. And yeah, I mean, it took a while, but eventually I found something that I more or less copy and pasted, and it did, you know, most of the grunt work for me. And I just got like a glimpse of that kind of coding magic, and was just kind of bitten then, I think, to just kind of carry on with it. So since then I've sort of been chipping away very slowly, gradually kind of learning bits here and there, and it's, yeah, I mean, it's a long journey, and it can be frustrating, but it's you learn so much along the way that is just kind of readily applicable, and you build up this kind of web of like, you know, I've done something here that's like, actually I can use it here, and you build up this kind of connection of things that are just like super useful. So yeah, I mean, that's like a quick potted history of how I got into it, but I'd also like to kind of give some tips and like some examples from some things I've been doing like in my job and on the side as well, that might be useful to some people. So my first tip is to take quite a bit of what you read with a pinch of salt, because especially when starting out, you end up reading these kind of blogs, like clickbait blogs, which say things like, you know, how I became a full stack developer in 10 days, or, you know, like I learned JavaScript in 90 minutes, like this kind of stuff. And it's quite anxiety inducing. And I didn't find it all that helpful at all. And it come across quite glib. And I think in the coding community, there's quite a bit of sort of flexing that goes on, which might have something to do with the kind of the bootcamp mentality, which is not to say like don't do a bootcamp if that's what you want to do, like it works for some people, but also really keep in mind that like that might not be suitable for you. And like for me personally, it's not. Like I don't personally at this point in time want to be a full stack developer. I like kind of just learning bits on the side which become relevant in my job, and like that's, you know, that's enough for me. That's kind of what I want at this moment in time. so yeah, kind of like carve out a bit of space in that's like something that you find interesting, and kind of use that as a bit of a filter for like stuff that you read, to try and avoid all that kind of clickbait stuff that's like anxiety inducing. So for me, that's turned into like, I've realized, it took me, probably a bit too long to realize, but I've realized that I'm quite into kind of layout and like the aesthetics more. So that's kind of led me naturally to learn more CSS rather than some other things. So yeah, I mean, don't obsess over, what programming language is trending, like what framework I should use, like this kind of stuff, because it's all super useful. Which is kind of my second tip actually, which is that it's all useful. I mean, like, keep a really open mind about like the potential applications of what you're learning, because you'll really surprise yourself. Sometimes something that you've learned will just crop up and be super useful somewhere else. So I mean, an example of that is in my current job, I have to collate download statistics for our publications from like a range of websites. And one of those websites doesn't actually have a formal way for me to get the statistics. And it basically means going to every individual page on the website and scrolling down, finding the graph, like looking up the month and getting the stat and like copying and pasting it into a spreadsheet. It's just, again, quite mind-numbing stuff. But so on the side, I was working on another project where I learned a bit about web scraping, which is a kind of horrible term, but it basically means visiting websites with code and like extracting information. So I saw that and was kind of like, oh, there's some really obvious overlap here. And I mean, it took a while and was frustrating, and I broke stuff and, deleted some stuff I should have deleted probably along the way. But eventually I had a kind of working version of what I needed, and it visits the websites and it pulls the information I need, puts it into a spreadsheet. So it makes my life a lot easier, and it's also scalable in a way that doing it manually is definitely not, because the more publications we make, the more I want to scream. It's like, it's not conducive to good working. So yeah, I mean, kind of connected to that, my third tip is forget what you know, which sounds a bit cryptic and potentially a bit odd, but it's basically when you get some work, or like there's something that you have to do a lot that's quite repetitive, don't just do it in the rote way that you're told to do it, or like this kind of received way. So like that example I just gave, I was told to do it a certain way, but I took a moment to think, okay, maybe there's another way that it could be done. So it's kind of twisting a little bit like the tasks, the daily tasks that you have to do, to turn them into a kind of learning opportunity. And obviously there's a trade-off between, getting things done on time. So if deadlines are looming, then don't take, it's a bit of a luxury to be able to say, okay, I'm going to take some time to, think about how I could do this in a different way. But if you do have that luxury, that time, even just a bit, it's really useful to start kind of cultivating that curiosity about doing things in a different way, and being able to kind of take little risks here and there to say, actually, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to think about doing it a different way and try and turn it into a learning opportunity. Because the thing that you risk by doing it in that rote way, fair enough, you don't risk losing your job because you're getting stuff done on time. But you kind of risk some ways only ever being able to do that job, because you don't learn these kind of other really useful, more kind of broader skills, which will, you can extrapolate out and do other stuff with. And so it's really important to kind of keep that in mind where possible. So yeah, forget what you know, at least temporarily, and and my last tip is to not suffer in silence, which may seem kind of obvious, but I think the coding community sometimes can seem really intimidating, and I've definitely struggled a bit kind of navigating that, and I think it stems from this thing that you find, which is called a minimal working example, and it means that when you post something, you have to post everything you need for it to be reproducible for another person. So they have to be able to replicate your problem so they can solve it. And sometimes that comes across as being like, no frills, no fluff. And, my natural tendency to kind of communicate is like fluffing everything up and, hedging a lot what I'm saying. And in the interests of being concise, people will edit that out. And it's not a personal slight. That's just the etiquette of like using online forums. So once you kind of learn that, then that will be really useful for communicating online with developers and people that can help you out. And I've really found that generally speaking, strangers are incredibly kind in this context and will help you out with all sorts of things if you ask. But yeah, it just kind of leads me to wrap up by saying that if anyone is interested in hearing more about what I'm up to, I'm more than happy to share the little I've learned so far. And I'm a really big advocate for project-based learning. I think collaborating on stuff really gets some good habits in early. So yeah, I'd be very open to hearing from people, and don't learn in a vacuum. Get in touch if that's something that appeals. So yeah, thanks a lot. Just good luck with whatever you take on.
Oh, thank you so much, Jamie. That was wonderful to hear. And I could just imagine everyone listening thinking, oh yeah, I spend all this time doing all these manual things. There's another way. I've got to find out more. Jamie has a wonderful personal blog, and you can follow along his adventures on that, and we'll put the links somewhere afterwards. Thank you so much again, Jamie. It's fascinating to hear and to feel such an empathy with the things that you were saying there. And I'm sure everyone else did as well. Next up, we're going to hear from Tanu, and I've so enjoyed watching her meteoric rise to get her first job in publishing. So over to you, Tanu. Can't wait to hear what your journey has been so far.
Thank you so much, Emma, and thank you, Emma, Suzanne, and Laura for having me here. I just saw the chat, and there's so many people from everywhere. So I'm a beginner at coding. I'm not a coder. I can't even call myself a coder. I've just started. And I'm just going to talk about where I started from, which was with Emma in 2018 at London Book Fair. I just wandered off to her session because I had a break from my internship that was happening elsewhere, and spent the next 30 minutes getting into this magical life down the rabbit hole coding. And I remember the activity we did was import data from Google, so bibliographic data from Google, and putting it on a page, and just changing the font and playing around with it. And I just remembered that moment, and it was all it took, really, because I was hooked. So I decided to follow it up, and I was working on my dissertation as well at the time. So I thought, oh, I have this amazing business plan. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this a website. It's going to be an amazing business. I'm just going to be really rich in no time. And when I decided to build a website, I realized, oh, I need to first learn HTML, the basic coding, and maybe then get on with it. So I had a very topsy-turvy journey where I, tried to look at it in a problem-solving view. This is what the problem is. This is where I can help. And then kind of realized I need to learn more, and I went back to it. It was also around the time that I was at uni, and I was still looking for jobs. So the next time I got in touch was in 2019 when I was with SYP, and I got in touch with Emma talking about coding again. And I wanted her to do a session with us at SYP London workshops. And I'm so glad we made it happen. It was the feeling you get when something works, when you type some gibberish and it looks gibberish to you, but somehow it ends up working. And that feeling is just, I can't describe it. So I wanted everybody at SYP to kind of see how easy it was to just get into it. I'm not saying all of it is easy and, you're going to be an expert in no time, but to get started and just get a view of it, it's really easy. And so Emma did the session at SYP, which was right after Future Books. I'm skipping a bit. I'm going to go back. Around the same time, Emma and Constance's team was coming up with Day of Code. what an amazing day. That was 40 of us. I applied and got selected. I won a free ticket. Thank you. And we went there. It was people from all ages, from all backgrounds. I mean, I'm in marketing, but I saw someone from rights, and I saw my friend from editing, and there was Sam missing. And there's just so many freelancers, entrepreneurs. And we had so many coaches who were also publishers who knew coding. And we learned how to build a website in a day. Again, can't build a website yet. Don't look at me for that. But I know how to get around one, and I know what to do when things go wrong. So at that session, I saw 7 full developers really, mull over my code because they couldn't figure out a /. So, experts can also get stumped. I stumped them. And it was through Day of Code and just putting my interests in coding and learning whenever I could. I was traveling, so I could learn. I downloaded an app and started learning coding on that. I didn't like the traditional way of, reading books and following a whole manual. So I downloaded games, and I started learning coding through games, which is amazing. It tells you how you can avoid repeating your code just by actions. And all of these varied interests in, networking got me to FutureBook, and Sam Missingham decided to tweet about it, which led me to a job interview where I did not get the job, but I spoke about coding there, and my interviewer, he was the head of sales, who said, well, there is another position you can try for, which involves coding, and we've been looking for someone. So it was an 80% like a marketing assistant job, but they also had involved, a website update, somebody who knows how to work a CRM and go from the back end and change images. And I looked at the job description. I was like, I know what they're talking about. I know at least 80% of that. I can apply. And yeah, that's how I got my job. And now every day, I'm on furlough now. I'm going to get back, guys. But every day I have something about coding that I get to learn or test, even at work. I still make mistakes. So one thing I've learned is not to feel guilty and not to get scared. On my first week at my job, I made sure that my publisher's imprint had completely disappeared from the website. And I was just like, I'm gonna get fired first week. Wow. And my boss was really sort of calm about it. She's like, we'll call the developers. And what I'd actually done was pressed the wrong button, but revealed a mistake in their code. So they fixed it. My point is, have a deep breath of things fall apart, and they can be fixed. All of this is man-made, so this is all come out of our brains. Think about that, okay? And yeah, so that's what I've been doing with my job. The other thing that actually works is I can tell my boss, oh, you know what, you just have 7 categories on your website, but these 5 books belong in the 8th. I can add it without you having to call the web developers. And yeah, I can provide insight. The other thing the job demanded was what Jamie said, how I can fix things, how I can make them better. And now my focus has changed from what I need to learn to what problems do my company face and how we can get it together. Coding has also let increase my interest in everything related to web. So I'm deeply into analytics now, and I sort of analyze the website, newsletter, and blog and present it to my team now. So they have insights into what works and doesn't. So that's my story. Obviously, would love to help. I'm an extrovert in nature, but an introvert in coding. I've never shared my pitfalls before, so this is great. And if I can just get on it, you can start and do much, much better than me. I'm pretty sure. And back to you, Emma. Thank you.
Oh, that is so wonderful to hear. And I remember at that seminar, there was this face beaming out of the audience. I was like, who's she? And your whole face was just a picture of radiant, oh, is this a thing? it's just incredible that the journeys that we start out on, you just never think that any of us would end up doing this stuff. You know, it's just one, like you say, one foot in front of another, and we find ourselves being technically competent. So thank you so much for telling us your story. And I know that lots of people will be keen to ask some more questions. I can see them all coming in now. Now we're going to talk to John Pettigrew. So John, can you share your story with us?
Right, thanks very much. Thanks so much as well to Jamie and Tunny for their stories. Now, that's been a really interesting way to spend the last 20 minutes, half an hour. And thanks, obviously, to Laura and Emma and Suzanne for bringing me into this. I am a little different from the other two you've heard. I am older. I'm in my late 40s, bit of a different story. Although definitely there are some similar themes. I was realizing listening to that, which is really interesting. I describe myself as a recovering editor. I've spent over 20 years in publishing, gradually moving from being a straight editor to having digital responsibility, to leading digital programs, to founding and running a publishing tech startup. And the next 10 minutes, I will be a gentle walk through the decades of my life and some of the key things I've learned about how to do tech, how to learn and get on with it. So we start in the 1970s, because I am a child of the 70s. I was young and home computers hadn't been invented, or certainly hadn't reached the north of England. So my awareness of computers and tech was basically zero. So swiftly moving on to the 80s is when things started to change. In 1980, Sinclair released the ZX80, the first real British home computer, with a whole 1 kilobyte of RAM. Just black and white graphics delivered through an old CRT TV. And of course, yeah, everyone wanted one, including me. And I spent ages round at lucky friends' houses watching blobs move around on screen and listening to the scream of programs loaded from cassette tape. We didn't get our own computer until 1984, and I spent many happy hours playing video games. But the benefit for me, I think, of being in my teens in the 80s, I think, was just the knowledge that computers can be pretty simple. It doesn't always look that way these days, and it can be much more daunting to get started, I think, than perhaps it was then. But by the same token, in the 80s, there were far fewer resources to learn from and far fewer folk to help out. So maybe swings and roundabouts, I'm not sure. In the early 90s, the email and the web arrived. And again, I was a good age. I wrote my first website in my mid-20s using HTML version 1. And I maintained a website with book reviews and details about my research and stuff on GeoCities through to the end of the decade. If anyone hasn't heard of it, GeoCities was a free hosting service that groups your website with other sites that have similar interests. It's kind of, the web was a surprisingly different beast in those days. By the end of the 90s, I also had my first job in publishing, and I was editing typescripts on hard copy. On-screen editing arrived quickly, though, and we all had to learn to use Microsoft Word, and that's when I first got my real experience of coding for work. Using Microsoft Word meant we could use macros, which are like little programs that take your text file and process for stuff like common misspellings or missing styles or house style issues and stuff. And even from the start, you could create those without writing any actual code, because you could record yourself doing something, and Word built all of the code behind the scenes by magic. But I found that sometimes I would start fiddling with that code, changing a letter here, copying and pasting it over there, because it was more precise than trying to record lots of very similar things all at the same time. So learning to just poke at it was a process, and it gave me more control over it. And I think writing macros is still, in Word and Excel, a really good way of starting to code, because you can solve real problems like Jamie and Tanya have talked about in your working life relatively easily. Any little job you do lots is a candidate for a macro. The thing here is then, there's almost no need to actually write code when you start learning to write code. It's all about learning about structures and creating relationships between objects. Building your own mental models of these things is what's important, and that takes practice. I ended the 90s by being made redundant for the first time, and I went freelance and stayed that way through most of the noughties. I didn't push towards being a developer or even really a digital person consciously. I just kept editing and increasing my library of Word macros, and I even led training sessions for other editors in how to customize Microsoft Word and make it do your will. And then I went back to corporate life as an editor at CUP's education division. It quickly became clear that most of the editors didn't want to understand the tech, and it was becoming more and more important to their work. So I quickly became the expert in solving CD-ROM problems and website problems. The thing about being an expert, I learned, is it doesn't mean you know all the answers. Indeed, you probably don't even know most of the answers, Being an expert means you know how to think about a problem and where to go and look for answers. It means being willing to try things out to see what happens and not being scared of breaking things. So that was my noughties, learning to be comfortable as an expert in something I had no training in. And it was largely driven not by the fact that I was great at it, but by the fact that no one else wanted to do it. So if you're interested, then you're on the right path, even if you don't feel like you really know anything yet. It's not about the skills and knowledge, but it's about the attitude, a willingness to learn, and particularly the willingness to just try stuff and not mind if it doesn't work first time round. The 2010s is when my career really went digital. I officially took on some digital responsibilities in my job at CEP. I worked on ebook conversions and developed proposals for ebook platforms. I specified and commissioned more and more complex web support for our customers. I used XML to lead the creation of iPad apps that were critically acclaimed, even if they weren't commercially very successful. The thing is, a time comes when knowledge starts to build on itself. You build up a knowledge of the structures and relations that the computers work with, and of the tools you use to manipulate them, and of how people will use the tools, and of the ways you deliver all of that to customers. And as that knowledge builds, it opens up new career options that you'd never even thought likely for you. So in 2013, I founded a tech startup. I haven't written a single line of the code in our product. I had actual developers for that. But all of those skills I've been developing over the years meant I could do several crucial things. First, I could identify and clearly describe a problem and the people who had that problem. But second, I could specify and design a technical solution to that problem. I knew what was possible and what wasn't, what was easy and what was hard, and how to structure a user experience. These are all skills that take time to develop. So to those of you who feel you're too old to learn tech, you absolutely are not. Indeed, you probably have more of the skills you need than you think you do. And to those of you who are still young, never mind, you'll learn this stuff eventually. It comes to us all. Running a team of developers uses the management skills I learned running a team of editors, but also the technical skills I'd learned over the years. I had to know enough about tech to tell the developers what to do and to understand what they told me about what they were encountering and the problems and all this kind of stuff. The most recent chapter, though, is the last year or so. Now, I'm an actual developer, I could say. I've written an actual software product with my own fair hands that's being used by actual human customers. It's big and it's complex and it does a worthwhile job. And I got there because of all that other stuff that happened. But I also got there for two specific reasons. First, I was helping out an ex-colleague with her new business idea with advice and support and stuff, because I'd been there before. She reached the point where the idea had to turn into something real. And it was how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? And I said, look, you could spend £20,000 with some developers, or I could build it for you, quick and dirty, blah, blah, blah. Or in other words, I was in the right place at the right time. And second, I had just started learning Ruby on Rails for fun. And I mean like literally a month earlier. Rails is a web development framework, and what she needed was really simple. Just a few pages and a bit of functionality with some text and numbers and some graphs and charts. And in 6 weeks, I built that first demo for her because I was willing to keep learning just a little bit faster than the folks around me. And because it was great fun, and things kind of just snowballed from there. And a year later, blah. So those are the things I've learned. First, if you want to learn some tech, then you can, and you probably will. Pay attention to your life, to your work, and see where you have a problem. Let's be honest, you probably know those problems already. Second, you don't have to eat the elephant all at once. Solve one problem at a time, and then solve the next one. Learn new tools as you go, and learn as many different things as you're interested in, because breadth is really important. And third, always think about how you'll help people, not about the cool tools you're using, because ultimately using tech is about solving human problems. Thank you. Back over to Emma.
I was so nodding along that I forgot the muting thing. I was just going to continue to nod, agreeing with all the things you said. Wonderful to hear. Thank you, John. And it's that building blocks thing again. I mean, we're talking with the luxury of hindsight, aren't we? And we can see the things that have happened that have led us to where we are. You're blind when you're going into it. So this is invaluable advice that we are we can only sort of learn the things in front of us, and we don't need to bite everything off in one go. So that was fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. And finally on our panel tonight, we have Lucy. Lucy, can you share your story with us as well, please?
Sure, I would love to. Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Moni Hall. I'm a software developer at The Guardian. I'm really happy to be here with you, and I wanted to also say thank you so much to Suzanne and to Emma for all the organisation during a pandemic, which is amazing. And thank you so much to all the previous speakers, because it's been amazing to hear your stories and absolutely fascinating to hear about these different paths into technology. So this is the story about how I became a developer. Before I had children, I was a commissioning editor at Lonely Planet. I was lucky enough to get paid to think about travel. It was my dream job. Then the great financial crisis began. The publishing and travel industries both stalled, and lots of people on my team were laid off. I was transferred to the London office. As you can probably hear, I'm Australian. I got married, and a year later I went on maternity leave. When you're an educated professional person and you become a parent, there's a high likelihood you'll read lots of books about parenting. Sooner or later, you'll encounter the work of Carol Dweck, who has spent decades researching growth mindset. In its simplest form, this is understanding your intelligence and abilities as flexible rather than fixed. My first encounter with Dweck's work was an article in New York Magazine called How Not to Talk to Your Kids. The article describes a study in which Dweck and some colleagues praised one set of children for being smart and another for trying hard, and then measured how well they performed in tests. The smart children were motivated to protect their identity as smart and shied away from the harder tests, whereas the children who identified with having tried hard were inclined towards the more difficult challenges, where there was a very real risk they might fail. I read this article to become a better parent, but I'm pretty sure this set off a shift in how I thought about myself too. I never went back to publishing full time, but worked as a freelance editor because I could do that from home while my baby napped or played on the floor. I had a second child and then a third. While I pushed a stroller around the streets, I wondered about work. I thought about starting my own business. I just had no idea what that would be. One day, just after my third child turned 1, I clicked on a link to a Huffington Post article by Ada Bernier, founder and CEO of Skill Crush, an online coding school that's designed to be friendly to women. Bernier argues that the best career move any woman or man can make is to learn to code. One of the things that appealed to me about learning to code was how impossible it sounded, though I figured I only needed to commit to trying it. I didn't need to mention my audacious plan to anyone. In December 2015, I completed a free 10-day program on Skill Crush, and shortly afterwards, I took the plunge and signed up for a 3-month-long course, which included HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Ruby. The HTML and CSS part of the course felt okay and kind of familiar. Then I came into contact with JavaScript. Let's just say I was not a fan. I found it so difficult to understand that I felt angry about it. I moved on to Ruby, and it was so much better. Writing Ruby was like writing in English. I finished the course and I was keen to do more. My top choice was a free bootcamp called Founders and Coders. However, they only took 16 people 3 times a year, and it was competitive to get in, so I figured it was a long shot. To qualify for consideration, you had to reach level 5 on Code Wars, which is this nerdy code training site. You also had to join and participate in a chat group where you could ask for help with coding problems. After about a month of slogging away on Code Wars and trying to sound upbeat on this Gitter chat room, I realized I'd reached a plateau. I decided to ask for help. One person gave me a list of accessible but more difficult problems on Code Wars, and another suggested that I write the words, "Do not give up," on my notes when I felt stuck. I tried some of the more difficult problems, and I embraced the phrase, "do not give up." This led to my first multi-day struggle with a single coding problem. I sat at my desk with the words "do not give up" on the wall in front of me, trying to understand the problem, drawing solutions on paper, revising how I could solve the problem with code, and trying to understand why my attempts were failing. When I solved it, I was energized and, truth to be told, a little dazzled. I could feel a new world of possibility opening up for me. I began meeting with another Founders and Coders candidate once a week to work through problems together. In late July, I got an email offering me a place on the 9th cohort of Founders and Coders. The idea with Founders and Coders is that you join a group of 16 other people with approximately similar coding ability and work together through a syllabus. I quickly realized I was the only person in my cohort who had children, and at 42, I was 13 years older than the next oldest person. As it turned out, age was not a particularly important factor. The most striking difference I noticed among people in the group was not in age, but in attitude. Some people simply found it easier not to understand the material and keep on focusing until they did. I was not one of those people. Time and time again, I found my mind would drift away from what we were doing. I would turn to the person next to me and say, "What are we doing?" It wasn't that I consciously thought to myself, "I can't do this." It was more of an unconscious habit. If I didn't understand right away, I just would start thinking about something else. That approach wasn't working for me anymore, and I began to gently try and lead my attention back when I found my mind wandering off. When the course finished, I began looking for a permanent job. My aim was to be employed by a place so infused with excellence that it would rub off on me. I applied for the Guardian's Digital Development Fellowship and the Government Digital Services Junior Technologist role, and I didn't make it past the first interview. It turned out I still had a lot of technical gaps to fill. At least the interviews made me aware of what some of those gaps were. During this time, I had some truly terrible interviews. The worst of these was at Pivotal Labs, which, to give you some context, is a very technical outfit that practices extreme programming. Completely by chance, a couple of months before my interview, I attended an event at Pivotal titled "There's No Such Thing as Objective Technology." I was there with a friend, and when I arrived, I made a silly face at the camera for my identity picture. When I arrived for my interview a month or two later, I typed my name into the iPad and it remembered me. A picture of me with my tongue sticking out was automatically emailed to my interviewers to announce my arrival. This was enough to make me falter a little, but my mortification was far from over. The pair coding session was conducted in a small glass room with two starchy and serious developers. One of them handled the keyboard, and the code was projected on a massive screen on the wall. The task was to recreate a thing called sets in a class in Java. My attempts at friendly chat were met with monosyllables, and the temperature in the room became chilly even as I started to sweat. I think the worst part of the interview was when the guy in charge walked me patronizingly through the process of adding an item to a collection simply to draw the word incrementing from me. It turns out that if I'd consulted Glassdoor before the interview, I would have known exactly what the task would be. This is Pivotal's signature test. However, even if someone had handed me a script as I walked in, I still would have failed to be what they were looking for. I think if the people had been nicer and the experience more fun, I would have walked out of there vowing to learn how to do what they wanted. What crystallized for me after this interview was that I could use the opportunity to assess my potential employer and ask them some tough questions in turn. I could also find out their interview questions and prepare better answers for next time. I worked at one or two places that I liked, but where I didn't feel entirely safe to fail. Early in 2019, I was offered a job at The Guardian. On my first day, which was just over a year ago, I was shaking with terror. For the first couple of weeks, I was convinced they would find out that I'd tricked them into hiring me and they would walk me to the door. Of course, I know about imposter syndrome, but my conviction that I was getting away with something was very real. After about 3 months, I had eased into things a little. I picked up a piece of work that I felt was well within my ability. It involved updating a piece of a checkout form so it was more in the page. It seemed pretty straightforward. It wasn't until I was publicly committed to this piece of work that it became clear to me that it was an order of magnitude more complicated than I had realized. I discovered that the changes involved the implementation of this thing called strong customer authentication and a range of additional token exchanges between different services, none of which I remotely understood. I found myself staring blankly at 3 sets of example code and 2 lots of documentation, and it wasn't long before my brain went into a confusion terror spiral. When I was first learning to code, I felt this way quite often. On my own at home, my confusion often resulted in anger, my default coping emotion. In the context of a workplace and people I respected and admired, I felt ashamed, anxious, and afraid all over again of failing and being found out. Thinking about failure took up so much mental space that there was no room for problem solving. However, the thing I'm starting to learn is that this is normal. It's not pleasant, but it will pass. I told my boss how I was feeling, and he told me about a time he felt the same way. He offered to help, but suggested that I take as long as I needed before asking for help, so that I had the best chance to gain confidence by doing it myself. This created the space I needed to struggle with the material and at length make it work. I have found it transformative to work at a place where the development of my confidence is considered a key metric of success. So that's more or less how I got here. Now I wanted to tell you some of the things that I found helpful in moving myself along this path. The first is accepting that there are no technical people. There's this very compelling narrative about technical people that's out there. There's this myth that they're different. At this point, I feel qualified to tell you that people who work in technology aren't any different from you. They do not have different or better abilities, and they are not geniuses. They are simply further along this particular path than you are. The second helpful thing is cultivating a growth mindset. If you feel that you were born with a particular set of abilities or talents, or that you are terrible at things that you would like to be good at, I urge you to read the work of Stanford Professor Carol Dweck. There is now overwhelming evidence that it is possible to change your mental abilities and strengths with consistent effort. Yes, you can get smarter, and yes, if you want to study physics and computer science, you can. And no, it doesn't matter how old you are. I'm not saying it would be easier, and right now it is a particularly challenging time. However, give yourself time and you can absolutely do these things. Practicing mindfulness. If you want to make any changes in your life, it is worth becoming familiar with mindfulness practice and even having a try at meditation or mindfulness if you feel able. Becoming aware of your inner dialogue and trying to observe it without judgment is a great first step. When I was first learning to code, as I've already mentioned, I started to notice my habit of failing to pay attention. This was getting in the way of making progress, so it was a habit I had to try and change. Finding safe spaces is the next thing I suggest. It's helpful to make some space around yourself so you feel safe to try things and have them not work. For a long time, I only wrote code at home with no one watching. Eventually, I was able to code with other people, but I found it helpful earlier on to make myself a bubble. Do what allows you to keep going and try not to be too hard on yourself. And the last one, and this is the hardest, finding ways to deal with failure. The day before yesterday, I rebooted my computer, and after the reboot, I simply could not get my code to run. After going through all the troubleshooting steps I could think of, it still wouldn't work. I Googled the error and I got a bunch of suggestions for how to fix the problem. I tried them one by one and I got nowhere. After 2 hours of banging my head against the problem, I went to my team on the chat and I described what was happening. Our engineering manager immediately asked if I was running Nginx. Since I had restarted my computer, perhaps it wasn't running. I felt like a giant idiot and immediately expressed my shame at not having thought of it. He said the magic words. Don't worry, I do that every time I restart my computer too. Empathy. It is the salve for shame. Shame and its friends, sadness, fear, and anger are the horsemen of the apocalypse when it comes to failure. If you can find a place to work where people understand the power of empathy, you'll find it so much easier to rebound from failures, whether they be small or large. Technology can feel like an arena, and especially at first, you are going to get your ass kicked. It does take some courage to show up and risk failing. The social scientist Brené Brown has written at length about shame and vulnerability. I strongly recommend her work on dealing with failure, which I found very helpful. So to finish up, I absolutely love my work. I deeply respect and admire my colleagues. I do exciting work every day. I'm often a little scared, but I'm never bored. If this sounds good to you, I hope you'll give technology a try. And now, handing the mic back to Emma.
Oh, that was so wonderful to hear. And I feel like we see each other. You know, none of us are special. None of us have got any magical powers. We're all human in all of our flaws and vulnerabilities, and you're acing it. I really hope that everyone feels like they could, you know, step in the same direction and grapple with all of the highs and the lows, but, you know, get these soaring highs that we've all described and share the joy and the love of it. I can't thank the panelists enough. It's just been so interesting, the similar themes that have come out over the 4 different talks. We've all talked about the energizing effect of doing something hard and winning. And it's the kind of accidentalness about how we've all found our path that I find so interesting. You know, none of us set out with a plan. If we did have a plan, it's not the one that came to fruition. And it's just so interesting to kind of grasp the opportunity that's right in front of you. And you know, one of the motivations that everyone seems to have come up with is not wanting to do stupid things all the time. You know, we value our sanity and our time. And I think as soon as that switch flicks and you know that there's a different way, a better way to do it, your patience for the absurdities and the minutiae of any job, you know, you gets a little bit irritating. I really like the idea that we're all not necessarily kind of full-time coders. I know John's moving in that direction, and I know, Lucy, you've got a proper, you know, job title, but we've all started in ways that mean that we're following our noses, you know, step by step, like we say, doing the things that matter to us and enable us to have a meaningful life and to solve the problems that are in front of us right now. We don't all need to be full programmers in order to get the huge value of code. And I would suggest that publishing more than ever needs us to acquire those technical skills, stay in the industry, and make sure that we're defending our industry as best we can, you know, using appropriate skills to make better books, make them more available to more people in new and diverse ways. We're all human, and we owe it really to our industry to make sure that we amass the skills necessary for us to survive through the pandemic and beyond. You know, I love that we don't have to be experts, we don't have to know everything right now, but if there are problems that have come up in your job and now you think perhaps I could, you know, solve those problems in a new and interesting way, like we've been saying, then, you know, hopefully there's some inspiration for you here. So I can see that we've had some questions coming in, so thank you so much for all of those, and do continue to pop them on the Q&A. I'm going to pull a few out and then ask our panelists if they want to unmute if there's a question that sounds particularly interesting that they'd like to chip in on. So there's a question. Let's start at the beginning. What's a good place to start? How much time should we invest into it as a beginner? So absolute, you know, starting point. As a beginner, how much time should we invest in learning code?
As a beginner, I spent about 10 minutes every day on an app. I would say you can go from 10 minutes to 2 hours. Make sure that you keep aside time that you need to do it, and just be consistent, but don't feel the need to sit down for 3 hours and read the entire book and do the entire course in one go. You know, like John and Lucy said, it is step by step, and you just have to get on with it patiently.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think it partly depends whether you're setting out to learn to code, or whether you think, I have a problem and I can maybe solve that with some code. If I was then definitely the latter, I never sat down and said, I must learn how, well, until fairly recently, didn't think I should learn how to code. If you have a problem you want to solve, you need to learn just enough to solve that problem. And therefore it takes probably as long as you're engaged with it. And I like what you said earlier, right now, solving the problem stuff. I think there's a special kind of laziness that is really useful. The sort of laziness that says, I would rather spend an hour on this now and save myself 20 seconds every day for the rest of my life. It's an investment in some effort for the reduction of pain and annoyance later on. But basically, I think what works for you. I think there's no right answer, I guess, as long as your enthusiasm keeps you going.
I'm just sending a link to the classic XKCD cartoon, which is a matrix of how you decide whether you should spend time automating the thing or whether you should just do the thing. It's meant to be funny, but it's quite interesting as well. John, you mentioned the phrase there, learn just enough, and there's actually a really good resource called Learn Enough to be Dangerous. It's written by the same guy who wrote the Rails tutorial, which I started out on.
That's where I learned Rails as well.
Is it really? Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
And well, two of us can't be wrong, right? So definitely check out learnenough.com. There are some free bits, and Michael is a really good educator. You can learn enough Git to be dangerous. learn enough command line, learn enough HTML, CSS, so you've got your building blocks, and it's an opportunity to follow your nose, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to put in a shout out for the Learn Enough command line. It's brilliant. It's a really great one for, you know, for everyone to increase their technical sophistication.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, here's a good question that's come in from an anonymous attendee. If you could talk to your younger self at the start of your coding journey, what advice would you give yourself about learning to code? I mean, John, you went way back when. You went all the way back to the 1830s, was it? What did you, what were you, I mean, would you have done anything differently? Would you give yourself any advice?
With respect to learning, no, because part of the thing is I kind of did that thing. I learned what I was interested in and needed at any given time. You can always learn more, but there's always other stuff you can be doing with your life. So I think if I was going to give myself advice, I would say it'll be fine. You know, keep on and do what works. Don't stress about it.
Yeah.
So my kind of younger self at the start of my coding journey is not all that long ago. But I guess some advice that I would give is to not work too much on sort of contrived examples. So you would do things kind of just for the sake of doing them, but not have like a bigger kind of project that they're aiming towards. So I would start a lot of things that I would just kind of let fall by the wayside, because I didn't have the kind of, you know, investment in it actually being a worthwhile project. So you end up with just all these fragments of things that, you know, you don't even know what they do anymore. I mean, you learn stuff along the way for sure, but I think it's good to have that kind of bigger project that you're aiming towards.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Someone asks here, did any of you try to take it to the next level and get some formal training in programming? If you did, was it worth it? I mean, Lucy, you bit the bullet and dived in. Did anybody else feel that they wanted to like pay money for learning? I mean, the interesting thing is the openness and the amount of material that's out there for free at the moment. And I think one of the things hopefully people have picked up on is that there are lots of different styles of learning, and lots of different personality types. And you've got to find the right one for you. You know, like Lucy said, you must try not to let yourself get disheartened if something doesn't feel right or doesn't work, because it just may be, you know, them, not you. So has anybody fancied doing formal training, or do they have a bit of a...
Over the last 20 odd years, I've spent $50 in total, which was learning enough Ruby on Rails.
Right.
Everything else I've picked up from random free stuff on the internet.
Brilliant.
and from just trying stuff out and talk to people occasionally and that kind of stuff.
I'm doing it,
cost much,
but that's only to get a certificate. Otherwise, there are so many free alternatives that I don't really feel the need to pay for anything except for a certificate.
Fantastic. Yeah,
I think that's a good point, because of course if you're trying to demonstrate to somebody else that you have skill, a certificate can be useful. You know, it's that qualification route of trying to get a job, as Lucy found. You know, you've got to get through hurdles. If you're trying to do it for your own, or just to make your life easier, you don't need any of that stuff. The result is the learning. But at some point you need to be able to show somebody you can do something.
Absolutely. Penultimate question. I had sort of, what are the next big waves in publishing coding tech that you see coming in the future? So we've looked in the past at our journeys. Anybody got a crystal ball they want to try and peer into?
I'm sure there's a lot more to people who will be able to answer this, but I think there'll be some interesting stuff in sort of production methods related to kind of web technologies, so layout that you see with like CSS, which I mean is not as capable as sort of desktop publishing systems, but I think that there might be some kind of overlap that you start to see more of in the future.
Wonderful. And then I'm going to nab the last question to the panelists. And I'm going to ask, can you share with people the communities that you found most valuable when you've been on your journey? We'll be able to link to various places, but I'd really like to hear, any venues, both in the real world and online, that you've really relied on and found a sense of home with, because I feel like at the moment, we all need that sense of community. So if you can share some ideas there, that would be wonderful. And I'll start us off by saying that there's a famous Ruby conference that happens in Brighton every year called Brighton Ruby. And this year it's going online. So it's alt.brightonruby.com. And there's a famous mantra in the Ruby programming community, which is Minneswan, which stands for Mats is nice, so we are nice. Mats is the guy who wrote the language in the first place. And that just tells you everything you need to know. It's a welcoming community, friendly to beginners. People just want to share the love. So if you wanted to attend alt.brightonruby.com, then you can come along and join in on that. I happen to have published the book that goes along with the conference. So obviously I'm slightly vested interest there. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Suzanne, do you want to hand it back over to you to wrap up?
Oh, was John about to say something there?
Sorry,
briefly?
John.
I was just going to throw Stack Overflow into the mix, which is a brilliant place to find answers to anything. One of the big, I said earlier, being expert isn't knowing the answers, it's knowing how to find them, and Stack Overflow is where to find them. If there was a problem, you can guarantee with your coding, someone has suffered it before, and they've written about it on Stack Overflow, and someone else has answered it. So it's a brilliant way to find answers to your problems. And if really no one has answered it, you can ask. And people will go, oh yes, try this. Stack Overflow, great place.
Oh yeah, free code camp.
Right. I think everyone could hear my alarm going off in the background then. I had a classic presenter's, I just put my notebook in front of my camera. So really acing the tech fails tonight. I just want to say some thank yous. First and foremost, to Emma, John, Tanu, Jamie and Lucy for really heartwarming and inspiring and reassuring talks about you don't need to know it all. You don't need to do it now. There's loads of doing it. And you know what? Sometimes it's not great. Sometimes it's brilliant. It's just been brilliant. And I think the chat shows how people feel about it. There's lots of really positive comments as well. I also, I'm going to do a few little waves and name checks because you've been a brilliant audience tonight. But I'd also just like to briefly recap and say thank you again to our sponsoring partners, TypeFi, Jason Mitchell and Stephen Laverick. Be really happy to chat to you if you want to find out about the work they do. We've also got Getty Images. Again, all that amazing content, and Michael Applin is the person to contact there, so you've got all the details there on screen. And then Ingram Content, who clearly are probably going to be super busy right now. We're trying to get books to places digitally all over the world. So contact Andy Bromley if you have any questions or you want to find out more about what they do. So thank you to our sponsoring partners, and thank you to you for joining us. You guys are what makes this work, whether it's face-to-face or online. And I just want to, it's been wonderful. The great thing about going online is that we've got people from around the world here. We hope to see you again at the next Book Machine Unplugged, which will be coming to you in the summer on audio in June. In the meantime, lots of stuff going on the Book Machine campus if you're one of our members. There's also the Wednesday Wisdoms. We've got loads of posts about tech this month as well. So just head on over to the Book Machine website, follow us on Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn, Twitter, and you'll see everything that's going on. So I don't know about you, but I'm off for a G&T. See you next time. Thank you very much, Emma and guys.